Evelyn Palmer adjusted the hem of her crisp white uniform as she stepped into Ward 4 of St. Bartholomew's Hospital. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, casting a sterile glow over the rows of beds, each adorned with the quiet rise and fall of patients' chests. Among them, an elderly man named Mr. Kellen lay still, his eyes closed, the thin blanket resting just above his frail body. Each day she recorded meticulous notes, his vitals, medication doses, but something nagged at her. Mr. Kellen was never truly unwell, yet he remained in a peculiar state of limbo, glowing faintly like a forgotten ember. Today marked his 7th week in the hospital, and not a single diagnosis had taken hold. As she leaned next to his bed, the sickening sweetness of antiseptic filled her nostrils, mingling with the faint metallic tang of the oxygen mask that clung to his face. Mr. Kellen's eyes flickered open, their cloudy depths unnaturally bright. "Nurse," he rasped, his voice thin as air, "you must listen for the whispers." She frowned, a chill slithering down her spine. The whispers began that afternoon, a soft choir that seemed to coil in the corners of her mind, growing louder each time she stepped into the ward. At first they seemed innocuous, the rustle of paper, muted conversations bubbling in the background. But as days passed, she noticed the shadows lengthening along the walls, stretching unnaturally, twisting impossibly. "I'm sure I left the chart here," she mumbled one day, searching her station only to find it missing. In its place, an old photograph lay waiting, showing a group of nurses from decades prior, their faces scratched out one by one. In its background, the familiar empty rocking chair sat motionless, yet she could have sworn she had seen it sway slightly just days before. Returning to Mr. Kellen's bed, she caught his gaze. "What do you hear?" he whispered as a draft brushed past her, the temperature dropping in an instant. She tried to ignore it, feigning indifference, but the shadows had thickened, and ink darkening the white walls. The whispers now dripped with a sinister cadence, licking at the edges of her thoughts. Each night, as she ended her shift, Evelyn noticed the ward door, a heavy steel number, stood ajar, despite being locked the previous evening. The rattle of knobs echoed, the faint sound of something screeching against the floor, sending icy tendrils of unease creeping along her skin. On Friday evening, the whispers turned urgent, insistent. She could swear they were calling to her, weaving through the ward like a thread of smoke. When she approached Mr. Kellen, he smiled, a grim, knowing smile that sent a shiver through her core. "They'll show you," he said, his breath barely a whisper. It was then that she noticed his IV bag. It appeared to bubble. A dark substance shifting sluggishly against the stark brightness of the saline solution. With shaking hands, she reached out, her fingers brushing against the bag, and the temperature plummeted further, a cold so deep it felt alive. In that moment, the whispers crescendoed, filling her ears with a cacophony of lost souls. Suddenly there was silence. In a blink, Evelyn was transported to another realm, a dim, swirling fog where the faces from the photograph loomed. They leaned in closer, their eyes vacant and hollow, yet piercing. Among them a figure stood, Mr. Kellen, backlit by a sinister glow. "You deserve to know," he echoed, the words curling through the smoke like tendrils of a lost memory. With a surge of realization, the room around her began to bleed and blend. The whispering crescendoed until it reached a singular clarity. The patients of Ward 4 were echoes, trapped in a timeless loop of despair, feeding off the living energy of the hospital's new occupants. Evelyn awoke suddenly at the nurse's station, heart pounding, cold sweat beading her forehead. The nurses around her were glancing in her direction, eyes filled with concern. They hadn't noticed her absence. Shaking, she turned her gaze towards Ward 4, but the door remained firmly shut. In the days that followed, Mr. Kellen's bed became empty. He simply disappeared, leaving behind only his personal belongings, an old journal with pages yellowed and dog-eared, filled with the musings of one who had lived far too long. The whispers ceased, but a heavy weight settled in the air. As her shifts dragged on, she would often find the rocking chair empty, standing quietly in the corner like a forgotten specter. And sometimes, when the hum of fluorescent bulbs turned to silence, She could almost hear the relic echoes, calling to her, urging her to remember. Evelyn never learned the full truth, but she felt the weight of that ward, the stories it held, and the shadows that would remain long after she left. In her heart she understood that some whispers are never truly silenced. They linger, waiting in the corners of our memories, in the places we dare not revisit.